Bad Ems is a spa town in western Germany. Old people go there to walk slowly, drink mineral water, and not die of whatever the 19th century was doing to their kidneys. On July 12, 1870, France won a diplomatic crisis it had been trying to win for 2 weeks. The Spanish throne would not go to a German prince. Paris had its victory. The next morning, the French ambassador walked up to the King of Prussia on a garden path and asked for more. 6 days later, France declared war. This is the story of how a country won and then chose to lose. To understand the telegram, we have to understand the job opening. In September 1868, Spain had a revolution and fired its queen. Isabella II fled to France, the premier Airbnb for exiled European royals. Spain needed to find a king. They asked the King of Portugal. He'd rather die as a Portuguese. They asked the 15-year-old Duke of Genoa. His mother said no on his behalf. They asked a French prince named Antonio, Duke of Montpensier. He wanted the job very much. Unfortunately, in March of 1870, while the search was still going on, Montpensier challenged Infante Enrique, Duke of Seville, to a pistol duel over a magazine article calling him a puffed-up French pastry chef. They bought the pistols the day before from a Basque gunmaker. They missed each other twice, but on the third shot, Montpensier hit Infante Enrique, who was also his cousin, in the forehead. The Spanish military court officially ruled the death an accident and gave Montpensier a month of house arrest. This did not help his candidacy. At this point, any sensible country would have considered a different form of government. However, ruling Spain has never been easy. The previous 7 constitutions did not work out. 2 civil wars in living memory. Candidates for the job must be Catholic, royal, and willing to relocate to a country that has deposed or exiled most of its recent heads of state. Having the French as neighbours did not help, since they may object, so benefits were limited. Spain decided to widen the search. By early 1870, the Spanish Prime Minister, a revolutionary general named Juan Prim, had one remaining option: a quiet, married 35-year-old German Catholic prince named Leopold Stephan Karl Anton Gustav Eduard Tassilo von Hohenzollern. From now on, just Leopold. Leopold's qualifications were: 1. He was a Catholic. 2. He was a Hohenzollern, which gave him royal blood. 3. He was available. Available here is a technical term, since Leopold said no in 1869. Leopold also said no in March 1870. Regardless, Bismarck sent envoys trying to influence the selection. Bismarck sent letters. Bismarck tried the younger brother, Frederick. Frederick also said no. Bismarck circled back to Leopold. In June 1870, Leopold finally gave in. He did not say yes to becoming King of Spain. He said yes in the following terms, and this is a real quote: "The most authoritative judge has demonstrated to me that the interest of the state required it." This is diplomatic language for saying, okay, I will take this shitty job. Spoiler alert, in the end, an Italian prince named Amadeo of Savoy accepted the Spanish throne instead. He reigned until February 1973. Then he quit, told the Spanish Parliament the country was ungovernable, and went back to Italy. So, do not judge Leopold for his mild enthusiasm. To understand the telegram, we also have to understand Bismarck. Otto von Bismarck was a Junker who had spent his youth fighting duels and his middle age outthinking the aristocracy he came from. By 1870, he had been running Prussia for 8 years, winning 2 wars. First, against Denmark in 1864 and Austria in 1866. And he thought Leopold accepting the Spanish throne would be, quote, an essential advancement of German state interests. because if a Hohenzollern sat in Madrid, France would be hemmed in by Hohenzollerns on two sides. And France specifically would hate it. There is a genuine historical argument about how much of what happened next Bismarck planned in advance. The German historian Joseph Becker spent 20 years going through the archives and concluded that Bismarck engineered the whole thing from early 1870 as a deliberate trap. The American historian David Wetzel thinks that's too neat. A number of French historians have lately decided that 1870 was not a trap France fell into, but a war France chose, giving their ancestors, at last, the dignity of having been extraordinarily stupid on purpose. Let's return to Leopold. On June 4th, he reluctantly accepted the throne. To keep the plan secret, the Spanish envoy, Salazar, didn't telegraph the news from Germany. He carried the documents by hand, stopping in Berlin to coordinate with Bismarck. By the time he reached the Spanish border on June 21st, 2 weeks had passed. From there, he sent a coded message ahead to Madrid. Keep Parliament in the building. I arrive on June 26th. The cipher worked perfectly. It kept the message secret from the French. Unfortunately, thanks to a Prussian cipher clerk in Madrid who misread a codebook, it also kept it secret from the Spanish. The clerk translated June 26th as July 9th. The Spanish Prime Minister looked at a calendar. Madrid in late June was an oven, also politically. He couldn't make his parliament sweat in a room for 2 weeks, waiting on a maybe, so he sent them home on vacation. 2 days later, on June 26th, the envoy arrived in Madrid to change the destiny of Europe. He found an empty building. Take notes. You cannot hold a surprise ratification when the Parliament is on vacation. Prim was now sitting on a stalled geopolitical time bomb. While he scrambled to get his government back to the city, the secret leaked. The French were now informed. 4 months of covert Bismarckian diplomacy were undone by a clerk who misread a number. The French reaction was immediate and, in retrospect, disproportionate. The foreign minister was a man named Grammont. He had previously served as ambassador to Vienna, where he had developed the view that Prussia was the worst thing that had ever happened to Europe. On July 6th, he gave a speech to the French legislature in which he said France would fulfill its duty, quote, without hesitation and without weakness. This is diplomatic French for, we are going to war unless you beg. Crucially, France was not threatening Spain. France had looked at the ongoing constitutional circus in Madrid and concluded these were not serious people. The target was Prussia. Bismarck could live with most outcomes. He could live with a French overreaction that handed him a war of German unification on a plate. The one outcome he could not live with was a quiet Prussian climb-down before the French finished escalating. That would cost him prestige, and in 1870, prestige was the only thing stopping Bavaria from changing its mind. On July 12th, Leopold's father withdrew the candidacy. Karl Anton, Leopold's dad, was largely retired, but as the man who held Bismarck's job before Bismarck did, he knew the game. He had spent the spring complaining about his son's lack of ambition. However, upon realizing his family was about to accidentally trigger a European war, he decided a change of direction was needed. More importantly, he was not acting alone. King Wilhelm I had hated the candidacy from the start. He had only permitted it because Bismarck spent 18 months arguing it was in the Prussian interest. When the crisis broke, Wilhelm did what he had privately always wanted to do. He gave Karl Anton his approval to withdraw Leopold's name. France had won. However, France, having won, decided to keep winning. That night in Berlin, Bismarck drafted his resignation letter. That same night in Paris, Gramont drafted Benedetti's new instructions. Gramont wanted guarantees that a Hohenzollern would never again try to make claims to the Spanish throne. This was a sign of French confidence. At 9 in the morning on July 13th, Ambassador Benedetti approached the King of Prussia on a garden path in Bad Ems. Benedetti approached him and made the demand. Wilhelm responded as you would expect. He was perfectly aristocratically polite. But he firmly declined to make promises for all eternity, and they parted ways. He sent word later that afternoon through an adjutant that he had received formal confirmation of the Hohenzollern withdrawal and considered the matter closed. He refused the ambassador's request for a second meeting. Abeken, the Foreign Office official accompanying the king, wrote it all up in a telegram and sent it to Berlin in 200 measured words. Bismarck received the telegram around 6 in the evening at dinner. His guests were Helmuth von Moltke, Chief of the General Staff, and Albrecht von Roon, the War Minister. Bismarck read the telegram aloud. According to his memoirs, written 28 years later, so take them with a grain of salt, everyone's appetite was ruined. The telegram said the crisis had been resolved, and this, for Bismarck, was a disaster. He asked Moltke whether Prussia was ready for war. Moltke said yes. He asked Roon. Roon said yes. Bismarck pulled out a pen and began to edit. This was not the plan. This was a last effort to repair a plan that had collapsed 12 hours earlier. The king had given him permission to publish the story. The king had not specified what story. He did not add a single word. He removed about half of them. He removed Wilhelm's own description of his refusal, somewhat severely, the strongest phrase the king had used. He removed the explanation that Wilhelm had not yet received news from Karl Anton at the time of the encounter. He removed the hours between the morning meeting and the afternoon dismissal, during which the news arrived and the king consulted his advisers. What remained was a telegram in which the French demand and the Prussian refusal happened in a single moment, with nothing between them. The edited version read, accurately but selectively, as follows. After the reports of the renunciation by the hereditary Prince of Hohenzollern had been officially transmitted by the royal government of Spain to the imperial government of France, the French ambassador presented to His Majesty the King at Ems the demand to authorize him to telegraph to Paris that His Majesty the King would obligate himself for all future time never again to give his approval to the candidacy of the Hohenzollerns should it be renewed. His Majesty the King thereupon refused to receive the French envoy again and informed him through an adjutant that His Majesty had nothing further to say to the ambassador. Moltke, reading the edited version, said, and this is in the record, "Now it has a different ring. Before it sounded like a call for parley, now it sounds like a flourish in answer to a challenge." Roon, according to Bismarck, was less literary. He said, "The old god still lives." All three men recovered their appetites immediately. The edit was telegraphed to the semi-official Prussian newspaper that same evening. The following morning, it was reprinted in every major newspaper in France. The following morning happened to be July 14th. In 1870, this was not yet a national holiday. The Second Empire celebrated Napoleon's birthday in August instead. But it was still the anniversary of the storming of the Bastille, and Bismarck's calibrated diplomatic insult reached the Paris street on the one date calculated to concentrate Parisian anger to maximum density. This was not planning on his part. This was luck. And then again, in translation, luck compounded itself. The German word for the man who had delivered the king's message was adjutant. In the Prussian army, that meant a royal aide-de-camp, and the specific man Wilhelm had sent was Prince Anton Radziwill, a hereditary prince, an act of deliberate respect. The French translator at the Havas news agency rendered adjutant as adjutant. In the French army, adjutant meant a non-commissioned officer. A sergeant, roughly. Same word, different army. German readers woke up to learn that their king had sent a prince to deliver a message. French readers woke up insulted to learn that the King of Prussia had sent a sergeant to dismiss their ambassador. This was not the main insult. The edit itself was, but it might have helped. Grammont, who read the dispatch in clean diplomatic German, said, for the record, that he felt he had just been slapped. The French reaction was immediate and, in retrospect, disproportionate. The foreign minister was a man named Grammont. He had previously served as ambassador to Vienna, where he had developed the view that Prussia was the worst thing that had ever happened to Europe. On July 6th, he gave a speech to the French legislature in which he said France would fulfill its duty, quote, without hesitation and without weakness. This is diplomatic French for, we are going to war unless you beg. Crucially, France was not threatening Spain. France had looked at the ongoing constitutional circus in Madrid and concluded these were not serious people. The target was Prussia. Bismarck could live with most outcomes. He could live with a French overreaction that handed him a war of German unification on a plate. The one outcome he could not live with was a quiet Prussian climb-down before the French finished escalating. That would cost him prestige, and in 1870, prestige was the only thing stopping Bavaria from changing its mind. On July 12th, Leopold's father withdrew the candidacy. Karl Anton, Leopold's dad, was largely retired, but as the man who held Bismarck's job before Bismarck did, he knew the game. He had spent the spring complaining about his son's lack of ambition. However, upon realizing his family was about to accidentally trigger a European war, he decided a change of direction was needed. More importantly, he was not acting alone. King Wilhelm I had hated the candidacy from the start. He had only permitted it because Bismarck spent 18 months arguing it was in the Prussian interest. When the crisis broke, Wilhelm did what he had privately always wanted to do. He gave Karl Anton his approval to withdraw Leopold's name. France had won. However, France, having won, decided to keep winning. News broke out, and Parisian crowds did what Parisian crowds do under these conditions. They went to the boulevards and shouted. They shouted, "À Berlin? To Berlin?" Within 24 hours, the French cabinet met. The Emperor, Napoleon III, who was 62 and dying of bladder stones and medicated on opiates, presided weekly over a decision he didn't want to make. His wife, Eugénie, Spanish by birth, his foreign minister and the press wanted war. On July 15th, his prime minister, a liberal lawyer named Émile Ollivier, addressed the French legislature and asked for war credits. Ollivier used the phrase d'un cœur léger. This is French for with a light heart. Ollivier spent the next 43 years writing a 17-volume memoir explaining that he had actually meant with a clear conscience. The only serious opposition came from Adolphe Thiers, an elderly statesman who had served as prime minister under the previous king, who knew Bismarck personally and who stood up in the legislature and said on the record, "You are making this war without necessity, without preparation, and without alliances." He pointed out that France had already won. The Hohenzollern candidacy had been withdrawn 3 days earlier. The cause for war no longer existed. The country was about to invade Germany because a foreign king had declined a request to an ambassador on a pavement. Thiers was shouted down. His house was stoned by crowds that evening. France declared war on July 19th. 6 weeks later, Napoleon III surrendered at Sedan. 6 months later, the German Empire was proclaimed in the Hall of Mirrors at Versailles. 44 years after that, the grandson of the King of Prussia would send his armies into Belgium. but we'll get to that in a later episode if you subscribe.